Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we have another Champions League tournament to be looking at, which is in the post-rotation format. So it's worth looking into ahead of the EUIC, so let's get into it. Now, there is one slight difference about the Miyagi Champions League, and that is Triplet Beat is a legal set. Now, the good news for us is that there aren't actually that many good cards in Triplet Beat, so a lot of these decks are one-to-one transferable into our current standard format, our new post-rotation format. And even if it's not one-to-one, there are a few cards. These are literally the only cards that you'll see in some of the deck lists today that will be different, but we have easy replacements for these sorts of cards. Artisan Town is a stadium that can grab non-rule box bench Pokemon. Jet Energy, probably one of the strongest cards from Triplet Beat, honestly, is a colorless energy that allows you to attach to a bench Pokemon and switch into the active, which is pretty solid in fairness. And Luminous Energy provides an energy of every type, but you can only put it on a Pokemon that has no other special energy attached, or if there are other special energy, it reverts back to just a regular colorless energy. I feel like all of these we can talk about in today's video in terms of how we could replace those cards for current cards in the format anyway. The only caveat is there is going to be one Lugia variant that we may see multiple lists of, which leans heavily into Jet Energy, so we'll just skip past those as quickly as possible because they won't be valid without Jet Energy. It's like a 4 of, and it's a big part of that new build of Lugia, but there are still current builds of Single Strike Lugia still succeeding in this format. So without further ado, let's get into the winning deck list. This is a Miraidon Regieleki deck. It's the first time it's had that big breakout performance in one of these larger scale tournaments. And it's actually honestly quite a different list where we see 0 single prizes in the entire deck. No Klefki, no Radiant Greninja, nothing like that, just multi-prizes all over the shop, leaning heavily into that tandem unit, of course. And another key thing to note is, of course, it's playing a 2-1 line of Magnezone V-Star. Actually a pretty interesting card. The Magnetic Tension does 40 damage and brings something up. So with one VMAX in play, you can bring up Comfey and deal 70 to it just with a regular V, which is actually kind of okay. You can do a similar thing with Manaphy. You can drag it up and then deal with their Manaphy, and then you have the option to use the Electrostar V-Star power, which is 2 90 damage snipes, which is also, you know, pretty okay. And it's a way that this deck can take multi-prizes into the Lost Zone matchup. At the same time, the Magnetic Grip is actually a pretty solid attack. Dealing 180 and allowing you to tutor 2 item cards is pretty strong, honestly, especially when Generator is such a big focal point of this deck. You can see that's also partly why you'll see Pokegear in here, because you can tutor the Pokegear that then gives you access to supporter cards, which is pretty reasonable to prevent bricking. So it's kind of nice to see a slightly chunkier 2-prize Pokemon, because one of the sort of issues with Miraidon is it's a decent racing deck, but all of its stuff is really squishy and easy to get knocked out. So having a Magnezone with slightly more hit points is pretty viable, honestly. It's also playing 2 Raikou, which I'm a real convert of. I think double Raikou is really, really important in the Miraidon deck to just make sure you have that steady flow of attackers alongside the double EXP share. So yeah, very interesting overall to see this sort of simplified deck list with Magnezone as kind of like the answer compared to anything like Klefki's or any other go-tos that we've seen so far. No Flying Pikachu either, that's also been experimented with Miraidon. But no, this was the winning list. It seems pretty streamlined and straightforward, but Magnezone seems to be the Galaxy Brain tech card going ahead. Then we have Lugia. So the best performing Lugia is still the single strike Lugia in this tournament. Now you'll notice there's 2 Jet Energy. Very often this will be divided up into higher counts of V-Guard, Gift, or Regenerative. So just, you know, divert these into other energies. It gives the deck some bit of help in terms of pivoting, but honestly it really doesn't change the deck too much. Obviously there's lots of high retreat cost Pokemon, so it's not necessarily a bad energy by any means. It will be an upgrade, but don't feel like this is a huge issue. This is actually something that we could pretty much just copy paste as of right now, but it gives you a good feel of how the supporter distribution looks. The double collapse stadium I feel is really important to respect Lost Zone players alongside that Radiant Serena. I'm surprised by seeing no Pumpkaboo and also only 1 single prize attacker in Stonjourner. Typically you would see a Yveltal in here as an additional dark type mon. Sometimes just double Stonjourner is also in here as well, so Not seeing that as a small surprise. Other than that, everything else looks pretty routine with the list. And seeing the judges and Roxanne, again, just sort of gives a nod to this player respecting Lost Box, in my opinion. Then we have in top 4 an Arc Giratina. This has that 2/2 big barrel and also Squovert to allow you to sort of get that full hand refresh, which is pretty cool. I think the other thing to note really is Lost City. It's the first time I'm seeing Lost City and Arctina. Typically you see Path and Collapse being a combination, but trying to deal with Lost Box players in a different way here, where you're sort of putting them on that clock by running out their key resources. Also has the Sharon's Care in here and Palpad to possibly have reuse of this card. Seems pretty reasonable overall. The rest of the list is more or less the same of what we've seen with Arctina in the past. This is where we have the sort of new build of Lugia. I will touch on this just quickly so you understand what's going on here. It's got Snorlax and Weirdeer, and because you have Jet Energy, you're not worried about Snorlax just sleeping. You can just jet into other Pokemon, essentially, as the core combo here, and Weirdeer can steal a ton of energies for itself and get a huge hit in. So that's the new age Lugia, I suppose. But yeah, this list is not usable for us because Jet Energy is vital for the Snorlax, because you don't want to start shoehorning in item switches or whatever into this deck if you can help it. So this is a new way to play Lugia going forward with Paldea Evolved for us when Jet Energy will be printed. But for now, we just have to, again, sort of give a nod to Lugia being consistent enough to Summoning Star, even with these weird coin flippy stadiums and trainer cards. It still seems to be getting the job done. So if nothing else, it's another nod to Summoning Star being consistent enough. But do sort of take this with a pinch of salt and know that we can't use this build going forward. We then have a Lost Zone box. This is also playing, so it's playing 1 Beach Court, 1 Artisan Town. You can very easily see this change into like a second Beach Court, and then maybe one of these shoes becomes a Nest Ball, and you've immediately sort of subbed out this, essentially, as the game plan here. So otherwise, it's really what we know about Turbo Lost Box already, where it has the high vacuum count and the Forest Seal Stones. It's also got the Kyogre combo in here as well, so it's on that slightly higher energy count, really, to try and incorporate the Aquastorm option. So pretty solid overall. Sometimes you see the Forest Seal Stone builds play Drapion, but this one is using Kyogre as the alternative line to help out against Mew, giving yourself ways to take multi-prize turns on their Genesects. And it's obviously solid in all sorts of other situations. Even the Echoing Horn in here can be pretty handy at times. Then we have another build of Lost Zone box. This is a Skyseal Stone build. This is where we see another one of these new cards. The Luminous Energy essentially is giving you an additional copy of your different flavors. So for a deck that's playing 4 different flavors of energy, it seems like a viable card, especially when you can Raihan for it. But again, this could then just end up being just another copy of another energy, or you make the space somewhere else and just play like 2 lightning for metal or whatever else to incorporate it. So just a minor thing here. It's really not that big of a card. You can definitely see this changing quite easily, but it's showing a kind of reduced Skyseal package of just Drapion and Raikou, but having that higher 1 prize focus where we see Zam and Lax in here. That's why we're seeing that sort of different energy splits. I think if we're in our format, Luminous Energy is sort of counting as that 4th metal, but for me, I think 4th metal is so important because Zamazenta has a 2 metal energy attack cost that I would definitely want an additional copy, and probably, honestly, just a second Raihan to incorporate this card to make it as viable as possible, but just more of a nod to the Skyseal Stone build continuing to be very strong. Then we have another Skyseal Stone build. This one is also very different. So this one is playing Jet Energies and Artisan Town. I feel like these could easily be, they're subbing out Beach Courts, but adding in this as a switch option. So just turning these back to Switch Courts, Beach Courts, I should say, and just also having higher switch cards and whatnot is probably the best way to go here. The only upside is Jet Energy can also be Greninja'd away and whatnot, and it makes the Snorlax kind of more safe as an attacker because you also have the Jet Energies and cross switches and whatnot. Cross switches is something that we've only ever really seen with the Charizard builds of Lost Box, so it's surprising to see it alongside Greninja. Also, this is playing double cancelling Cologne, which I think is pretty interesting, where you can obviously remove some abilities. This is a way around Klefki. I'm not really sure what else this is sort of helping out against, but just a small thing there. So this is kind of one that we can't really look into in too much detail, but again, it's another nod towards Skyseal, as well as having like Lax in here, as well as another gate option alongside your Greninja. We then have another Jet Energy build of Lugia, so we'll move on from this one pretty sharpish, but just a quick note to that. And it has Luminous Energy Charizard as a late game combo. We go back to a single strike build though, and you can see how important Jet Energy is. Like, if people are getting away with one copy, this can end up being just put into Gift, V-Guard, or Regenerative, or even Double Turbo at that point, and then we've got basically the shell that we could be playing in today's format. So cool to see again, just the split of the supporters. Once again, Roxanne finding its way into some of these Lugias, definitely something to take note of. We have another single strike build. Again, yeah, Jet Energy, not a huge deal here. This one is playing Towers, and is playing, 4 of the single strike guys. It's also playing Radiant Gardevoir rather than Radiant Serena. I think the upside of Radguardi is obviously is helpful against Arc Tina and Lost Tina, as your Lugia can sit out of range, which is kind of nice. I think that's kind of the biggest upside, whereas Serena has bigger upside into the Lost Zone matchups. So I would imagine I would expect to see more Serena out the gates, but Gardevoir can be a decent option if we're seeing an uptick in Giratina. More more single strike, I should say, builds of Lugia. Again, nothing too spicy here. Even with Jet Energy in format, this list is choosing not to play it, so that just shows that the core is still very much here. And I really like this build, honestly. I definitely like having 2 single prize Pokemon, whether it's double Stonjourner or 1-in-1 Yveltal. Double Collapse I'm really coming around to as well, because I respect Lost Box enough that I think it's worthwhile. So yeah, seems pretty good. We then have a Miraidon Flaffy list, actually, in top 16. This is a super interesting one, because it's playing Sky Seal and double Forest Seal Stones, which is not something I necessarily expected, but I suppose the idea is that you can weave in one for the right situation. It's playing a very interesting support account as well, with 4 Research, 4 Judge, to try and be disruptive in that regard. It's got Raichu for higher damage output thresholds. It's got Raikou and Miraidon just to get us into the game. And honestly, we've not seen a huge amount of Lost... Well, actually, we have seen a lot of Lost Zone box in this top 16, but yeah, I think that's the only real thing holding back a Flaffy deck, right? You have good damage output potential in all the other multi-prize matchups, which I think is worth keeping in mind. We have a Giratina build. This is utilizing Jet Energy. I think this is going to be a big upgrade for Giratina, actually, seeing as... just like when Capture Energy was a decent 1 or 2 count in Giratina, I think Jet Energy will definitely help add to your energy counts, which helps Greninja, but also adds to your like early Confe pivots cards. So I think that's really solid for Giratina going forward. If you want to find replacements, again, it's probably looking at things like Beach Court, although this is quite high on other stadium cards, even just adding towards your other switch counts, because these are fairly low compared to what we have in the current format. Then we have another Jet Energy Lax build, and then we have a DT-based Mew that looks more or less pretty straightforward. The Quad Vacuum and no Lost City does make me a little bit afraid with the amount of Drapion with Pokemon Recovery that's in the format, so I'm always a fan of the Lost City, but I also do understand why Vacuum is in such high counts, because it's a great way to hand thin throughout the entire game, so you can continue to draw cards with Fusion Strike system. So I wouldn't mind seeing like as low as 1 Lost City and still keeping a high 3 count of Vacuums in the deck to make sure you're still churning and burning with Fusion Strike every turn. We also have a Gardevoir. This is actually a really interesting Guardi, where we see the split of 3 EX and 2 Shining Arcanas. Typically you see that split the other way around, or just a 2-2. This is also choosing to not play any Mirage Step, just plays 3 Candy, 3 Refinement Curliers. It's still playing that Cresselia, Mew, Greninja combo. It's not playing any Jelly, though. It's just playing Picnic Basket for a bit of healing, as well as the Cresselia, which is somewhat of a surprise. It's also not playing Manaphy, so it's like really not respecting Lost Box too much, I would say, which is obviously very risky. But it does have like a ton of Ball Search in the deck and a lot of space for that. It's even playing Choice Belt. So this is like a higher damage output trying to be aggro Guardi. And I think the fact that it plays triple EX leans into that double Choice Belt quite a lot, where you have that high roll of sometimes you're just using Guardi EX to knock out one of your opponent's Vs on turn 2 for tempo. So I think this is a nod to the format being more focused around things like Lugia in the next set. To see Guardi wanting to have this choice belt access definitely points in that direction, I think it's fair to say. So that rounds out the Miyagi Top 16. There is also a Hong Kong Regional League, which happened last weekend. I haven't yet got the actual 60s for it, but we have got the breakdown of the top 16 on the right-hand side here. This is the day one breakdown of the decks, but we have the top 16. It was an Arctina win with a Mew second and top 4, a Lost Gudra in top 4, which is very interesting. Lugia V-Star then dominated top 8 and a lot of the top 16. And we see one Giratina was in top 8 and top 16. We see one Urshi Intel with one more Mew and only one Lost Zone box. So I'm pretty certain this also allowed Triplet Beat to be legal, because I see all of these Lugias are the same, and then we have this one with Archeops. I imagine this is just like a colorless build of Snorlax and Jet Energy, but it still shows that the single strike build is coming out on top, even with the new additions of Triplet Beat that we won't have access to. Surprisingly enough, though, a lot less Lost Box, so it feels like people are using things like Lugia to challenge that matchup quite well. Arctina coming out on top as well is, it's had a decent number of results now in various tournaments, and for its played rate, it's actually done exceptionally well. Also, Urshifu, not super popular and did exceptionally well. In terms of flopping decks, I think Guardi EX is probably the one that you would say on the list. It barely made top 16. Well, it didn't make top 16 even though it had that much of a placement, and Lost Zone Box also really underperformed for its ratio, right? 22% played and then just 1 in top 16. That's also a massive underperformance from being the most popular deck. So that's another breakdown in more Eastern tournaments. This one, I will admit, with Jet Energy, things are a little bit different. Lugia seems to be a more powerful, well-rounded deck where it has switching cards inherently in the 60. But that's not to say that people can't still just copy-paste their sort of supporter lineups and item lineups to give us a good indication of what makes a consistent Lugia going forward, as well as the other decks that we talked about today. So hope you enjoyed this little chat on the Champions League tournament. It was a 2,700 player event, so I definitely think you should these results should carry some weight, even though it's not a one-to-one format. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.